Welcome to the 100th celebration of the Ironton Tanks. It's really nice of the Chamber of Commerce to put this on. It's nice looking out, seeing a lot of the high schools represented here. I hope one thing you take away is a little bit of the history of the football of Ironton, because the Tanks was the real deal. Now they're the real Detroit Lions. So it all started right here in little Ironton High. First person I'd like to call up is Caden McFadden. He's going to do the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Caden. Now I'd like to get Mr. Joe Unger up here for the invocation.
Before I begin the invocation, I would like to tell everyone that the person who was supposed to give the invocation didn't show, so I found this out about 5 minutes ago. So I promised I would not say anything about shoes. Oh, I just did, I'm sorry. But I thank you all for being here, and I will begin now. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time that we're able to share together. We thank you for this food that we are about to receive from your bounty. And we ask that you bless all of the players here with safety during this season. We ask that you bless the coaches with guidance. We ask that you bless all of the leaders who are here so that they may remember our history and build on our history through their good works. And in the name of Jesus Christ we pray, amen.
Thank you, Joe. Now it's time for lunch. I'm sure a lot of you are. I know Sins Valley's hungry. Rusty's already told me he's pretty hungry. So we're going to start with the head table. Then we'll go to the Ironton, Chesapeake, Sins Valley, Cold Grove, Rock Hill, Fairland. We'll go that way. And then the back table. So you guys step up there and get your lunch. An historian, his son was All-State at Ironton, went on to play at Yale, one of the finest orthopedic surgeons around. He's made a lot of money off me, I know that, and he's done a good job. And his grandson's here with Sins Valley. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Bob Leith.
If you watched me walk up here, you know I didn't play football. They said if somebody tackled me, it would be like snapping a twig off a limb of a tree. At my 150 pounds at Ironton High School, I was a great spectator, but not a very good player, as I knew not to walk out on that field. Are you Ironton boys going back to school today, or are you going to milk it out all you can? Reason I ask, I used to teach and coach at Ironton, and they'd have these pep rallies, 6th period. The last 20 minutes of 6th period there. The girls would put on their makeup and stuff like that, and we'd go down there and get them all jacked up, and then the players would come up and they'd start hitting the lockers in the hall with their forearms and denting them. So they made us teachers stand out in the hall after the pep rally and keep them from destroying the lockers. So if you go back today, you know, remember those lockers are for books, those things that you take home every now and then, that we use later on. Well, I've been asked to speak today, but I had a man sitting at the table with me from the Detroit Lions, and if I never played for anyone and he was a pro player, I'm going to let him do the bulk of the talking because he's famous and I'm just a local yokel. So you'll hear from Mr. White here in a little while, and I'm sure he's got some good stories. I was informed here by Marty of what might be of interest to say, so I would like to start out telling you a story and then go directly to the Ironton Tanks. I'd like to take you back 229 years ago to northwest Ohio, to Putnam County, at a place called Ottoville, which is between Defiance on the north and Lima on the south. That was an Ottawa Indian village, and there were several tribes residing there at that time in the fall, this time of year, 1790. A party of white men had left Cincinnati and were going to Detroit, which was a British-held fort, to conduct judicial affairs because there was no Ohio then. It was merely the Northwest Territory, and the secretary, governor, and 3 judges had to conduct moving courts. So they stopped at this Ottawa village wanting to have harmonious relationships with the Indians in that part of Ohio. The chief, Bacongahelas, told them they were going to have a grand athletic event and he would like for them to stay for it. So at mid-afternoon, the Indians of that village, of various tribes, dressed in their finest garb, men and women. There was a huge 4-acre plain there at that village. And mid-afternoon, the chief, a Delaware chieftain named Bacongahelas, walked out with a ball under his arm. What he was going to ask these white men to watch was a game between the men of the village and the women. They walked out in their finest Indian garb. Bacongahelas walked out in the middle of the plain, took the ball and tossed it up, and then got out of the way very fast because there were 100 men on that one team and 100 women on the other. The ball was not like the ball you'll use tonight. The ball you're using is 11 inches long and it's 8 inches in diameter in the very middle of it. The ball was round like a soccer ball. It was not firm. It was very soft. The object was to throw that ball or kick that ball through 2 stakes driven in the ground at the end of the 4-acre plain. They were 6 feet apart. I guess they were historically the first goal posts in Ohio history. Just a few limitations here I might mention. The women could kick the ball, run with the ball, pass the ball, lateral the ball. They were playing Ohio football. The men had to kick it with their feet. Should they touch it with a hand or arm, they forfeited the game to the women. So these white men stood there for 1 hour, and nobody got close to either set of stakes. And after an hour, this big squall, when I say big, I am minimizing the use of adjectives. She picked up this ball, tucked it between her forearm and her chest, and started running toward the other end of the plain. As she ran, she gained momentum and knocked down these men like bowling pins falling aside. She went down there and turned and looked at everybody and threw the ball through the stakes. The women, 100 of them, beat the men, 100 of them, at Ottoville, Ohio in Putnam County 229 years ago in autumn of 1790. The man who wrote this story down I've told you is named Jacob Burnett, a Cincinnati lawyer. And Mr. Burnett wanted to get this published, but it wasn't done so for 47 years, so we found out about this football-like game in northwest Ohio 57 years after it happened. They say this is a predecessor of the Ohio-Michigan game without women on the field, and they say Mr. Burnett was the first Ohio sports writer. The Indians also, we'll save this for another day, gave us the principles of basketball. So maybe these savages weren't as savage as we say they were at times, as they had their games and their vocabulary and their syllabaries and things such as that in their way of life. Now, football began in the 1850s, just before the Civil War, and the communities had football teams. In the part of Ironton where you're now sitting, the football team was called the Ironton Lombards. And they were named after a very savage, barbaric German tribe that left the Baltic Sea and invaded Italy in the mid-500s and really scared the Pope and the Catholic Church at that time. And the other part of Ironton, down by Hanging Rock, was a group of football players called the Irishtown Rags. And they are looked upon as the predecessors or forerunners of the Ironton Tanks football team. And they would play teams within the community and in other communities. But along this stretch of river, you know, people in other parts of Ohio call all of you and me river rats. We have that name. And I'm glad none of our high schools have the moniker rats. But there were, along the 30 miles of the Ohio River, 3 superior semi-pro football teams. There were the Ashland Armco's, the Portsmouth Spartans, and the Ironton Tanks. New Boston had a team, believe it or not, as did Huntington. And they would play each other for bragging rights. Now, we didn't have collegiate football until 1869, when that's during Ulysses S. Grant's presidency. He was having a hard time, but those guys on the field would have a harder time. At New Brunswick, New Jersey, Rutgers played the College of New Jersey. The College of New Jersey would become Princeton. Rutgers won 6-4, and I think those people at Princeton are still aching from that because they're an elite Ivy League school. But times were different then. Football at that time in college would see a field goal worth 5 points and a touchdown worth 4 points. And you could not tackle or block below the waist until 1888. So it's a very, very different game. Now, I might say before I tell you about the Tanks here, it were not for a man named Walter Camp of Yale University, I don't think we would be playing the game we're playing tonight. He was a tailback at Yale, captain at Yale, coach at Yale, athletic director at Yale, and he's the one that gave the name football to this Indian-like game. He put a man called a quarterback behind the center. He defined what was called the line of scrimmage and said only 7 men should line up there. He also invented signal calling, and he decided that there would be 11 men on a football field playing for one team at one time. When football first started in the 1870s, there were 25 to 30 per team. And they had very little equipment, but they wore real fancy hats to designate their team colors. That man is known as the father of football, and he served on a rules committee of American football for 38 years and published a rule book every year until he died in 1925. Well, the Ironton Tanks were established in 1919, just after World War I. T.C. Davies, Bill Brooks, and a few other football-like-minded fellows organized the Ironton Tanks. They would be in existence until 1930, when they folded, not of their own fault. 12 seasons. Now, there are different reports on what their record was, but they did win 88 games. They did tie 15 games, and they lost 17 games. But let's look at who they played. They played teams from Kansas City, Kokomo, Indiana, Toledo, Columbus, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and of course, their greatest nemesis was Portsmouth, Ohio. And not ranking far behind Portsmouth was a place known today as Tomcat Land over in Iceland. And that's going to be a very big game, I understand, here in the tri-state. So they outscored their opponents in those 12 years, 1,937 points the Tanks scored, the opposition 380. Now, let me tell you why I think they were called tanks. During World War I, the British invented a war weapon called the tank in 1916 within the war itself. But it was never successful till 1917 in the Battle of the Somme. Now, the British tried to keep this a secret and called it a water tank, leading the world to believe it was some kind of mechanism that would be used on the oceans of the world. It was successful, and when it did act in war, it just pulverized everything in its wake, the terrain, the other weapons, and the Army if they happened to be sedentary there. Now, in football, teams in college used what was called the flying wedge as their offensive maneuver. They would take the toughest, meanest, biggest, roughest guy on their team and put him at the point. Then they would line up guys on the team behind each hip of his, and they would hold on to the belt or strap of the player in front. Then they would put guys in between the two lines. And this was like a moving V, or a flying wedge, as they called it. They would then aim at the defense, its most vulnerable point, and they would hurt people going through the defense heading for the goal. In 1905, 14 years before the formation of the tanks, Teddy Roosevelt got very angry. A lot of people in America thought since the Civil War is over, there's really nothing we Americans have to make us manly, to make us masculine, to make us virile, to give us character, except college football. And this, as you know, is the 150th year of intercollegiate football here in the United States. Now, Teddy saw that this built character, and he was all for football until Yale played Harvard in a freshman football game, and the Yale team beat up his son severely. Then he called a meeting October 9th, 1905 at the White House among the three biggest football powers in America. That is not Clemson, Alabama, and Georgia. That's Yale, Harvard, and Princeton. And 6 guys showed up, and he said, look, if you do not decrease the brutality of football, the violence on the field, I am going to ban football in the United States. Sounds like another president we have, isn't it? He said, I'll use an executive decree. Well, that was not a threat. He didn't like his son being beaten up. So they went back to the schools, they worked together, and they told him, he said, we will abide by better rules. Because you see, in that year that he called him there, 23 people died in football games, 18 college games. 159 were disabled due to injuries and told not to play football again. So you know what they came up with to keep football in America, and some of you may be recipients of this tonight if your quarterback can get the ball to you: the forward pass. The forward pass was an option to keep football and to lessen the severity of it. But, quarterbacks, you had to be 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage when you threw the pass, and you could not throw it for more than 20 yards beyond the line of scrimmage. So we kept having improvements in football due mainly to Walter Camp and Yale University. You know, I feel kind of foolish saying this, but when I entered the 8th grade at Ironton, my high school principal was T.C. Davies. He had a stern look about him. He had a game face. You knew not to mess up. You didn't want to go in that man's office. He had been the greatest Ironton Tank in its early years there had been, and one of the men who organized the team. I didn't know that my principal, whom his teammates called Old Swivel Hips, was a famous Ironton Tank. When I played basketball at Coal Grove High School, the guy that refereed most of our games was a man named Harold Rolfe. He was an Ironton Tank and one of the finest gentlemen I've ever met, but no one ever told me in Ironton High about these tanks or about football or anything, so I was quite ignorant of their past. Well, I want to tell you 2 instances where the Tanks did indeed prevail. You know, they played Portsmouth and Ashland. They had to beat them. That was just a passion with them, you know. But they, as I say, won 88 games, and the 2 most notable ones are in November of 1930. In November of 1930, Ironton Tanks traveled to Cincinnati, Ohio, to Redland Field to play the New York Giants. Let's be clear about this. New York Giants finished second that year in the Professional Football League. They had a record of 13-4. Ironton went down there to play them, and it was on a weekend, of course, on a Sunday. You played the games on a Sunday because the lighting was so poor you couldn't play at night. And the New York Giants had an all-universe player named Benny Friedland, an All-American from the University of Michigan. And I guess he could do everything. Well, they played and it rained the entire game. But Glenn Presnell of the Ironton Tanks and Benny Friedland each threw over 20 passes in the rain that day. Now the Giants punted to the Ironton Tanks, and Glenn Presnell was back to receive the punt. Just a few seconds left in the game. He ran the ball toward the sideline, stepped out of bounds at the 27-yard line. 3 seconds left on the clock. They went in the huddle, and he said, we're going to feint like I'm going to run to the right, but I'm going to throw a pass to Gene Alford. And he threw the pass with time running out. Alford caught it, went in the end zone, tie game. Ironton kicked the extra points and beat the New York Giants at Redland Field in 1930, 13-12. Less than 2 weeks later, the Ironton people were excited because there was another game at Redland Field in Cincinnati against the monsters of the Midway, George Halas's Chicago Bears. Ironton given a little chance, so why are you even going down there? Well, they had a special train come to Ironton, Norfolk and Westward excursion train. The Ironton people packed the train. There wasn't room for any more, so they had to go in a car caravan to Cincinnati. And they went down there to play the monsters of the Midway. The Chicago Bears had two people that were incomparable in the history of football. Harold Red Grange. Red Grange had played for the University of Illinois. The first 5 times he was given the ball against the University of Michigan, he scored touchdowns. He was immortal in football history. He was called the Galloping Ghost. You just didn't tackle him. Then he had a fullback, the prototype of the bruising, blocking fullback named Bronco Nagurski. Both were 2 of the earliest inductees into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. We played that game down there on November 30th, 1930, and Ironton won 26-13. So there in 1930, Ironton was beating teams in the Pro Football League. But then at the end of the season of 1930, the Ironton Tanks were in debt, $3,530. They had a team to pay, had a stadium to maintain. Oh yes, and I didn't know where I should say this or not. The Ironton Tanks recruited college players to play for them on Sundays. You see, the college players played on Saturdays. So on Sundays, they would hire guys to come in, and the guys would put plaster on their face, adhesive plaster, so they wouldn't lose their eligibility if they had any remaining in college. As I said, the first great tank was a man named T.C. Davies, my high school principal. The first man ever to be paid to pay for the tanks was a man named Doc Elliott from Toledo, Ohio. He got $50 to play. But the man I want to talk about before I conclude is Glenn Presnell. If you knew nothing about football or never heard of him, he was one of the finest Christian gentlemen, one of the finest human beings God ever put on this earth. Today is the day he died in history. He died September 13th, 2004, just outside of Ironton here, at age 99, the oldest NFL player alive on planet Earth. Now, Glenn Presnell played for the University of Nebraska. He led the nation in rushing. He was offered a contract with the New York Giants, but he was offered to come and play for Ironton, Ohio. Now, they offered to give him $150 a game. Played about 10 to 12 games a season. But they gave him a teaching job, teaching at Ironton High School and coaching there, and paid him a whopping fee of $1,600. So he was good in math, and he said, oh, $4,000 a year, you can't beat that. I'm going to Ironton. So he came to Ironton. As I said, he taught, he coached, couldn't play games at night. Colleges played on Saturdays, so the Ironton Tanks played on Sunday afternoons. Glenn Presnell was a major architect in those 2 wins over the Giants and the Bears. Been several local efforts to incorporate him into the Hall of Fame. In fact, I just spoke with a former Ironton coach a few minutes before I came here, said he deserves to be in there because in 1935, after the Tanks folded, he signed with the arch enemy, Portsmouth Spartans. And after they joined the NFL, and after that, he became a Detroit Lion. And he is partially responsible for the colors of the Detroit Lion jerseys that they wear today. Mr. Presnell is a very humble man. He said the thing about Ironton he couldn't quite adjust to, when he played at Nebraska, there's all this level land, all these flat plains, and he said he got here and he said the hills just surrounded him everywhere. You couldn't look anywhere without having hills press in on you. But he did die in 2004, and he is recognized as the greatest tank of the Ironton Tanks. I'd like to mention this stadium here where Fairland and Ironton are going to square off tonight. That was called Beechwood Stadium because of the beech trees over in that park I'm looking at now across the Ironton track. And in the fall, you would see beech nuts fall from those trees on the tennis courts, and the tennis players didn't like that too well. They started talking about a stadium in 1925, but they didn't know if they could raise the money. So on April 26, 1926, between 50 and 60 boosters met at the Elks Club here in Ironton and said, we have to raise money to build a stadium. Within 10 days, they had $33,500, astronomical amount for that time. And they wanted to get that stadium built before the first game in late September of 26. They built a stadium. That stadium would seat 3,112 people if no overly large people consumed more space than what was allotted in. Across the field over there in the bleachers was seating for 1,200 more. Now, today, Ironton says it can seat 5,000 people comfortably. I heard before the Wheelersburg game they're expecting over 7,000. But the thing that made that appealing was that there were 40 box seats underneath that roof over there in 1926, and it had a roof on it. In fact, a former Ironton coach told me he went to the game, Wheelersburg game, and he said, you know, he always stood in the rain on the sideline calling the plays, but he said it was so bad and things, he got so tired he had to go up and sit down in the stands, which he wasn't used to doing. He always stood in the end zone as a spectator and watched the Tigers come crushing into the end zone. That was a heavy responsibility, recruiting college players, maintaining a stadium, and paying for the cost of the team to travel to play bigger teams. So the Stadium Association decided they would cut loose the stadium. They gave it to Ironton High School in 1933. They could no longer afford the costs there. The Ironton Tanks folded in after 1930 season, but they formed a new league of just local teams around Huntington, Ashland, you know, and they called it the Tri-State League. And because we were in the third year of the Great Depression, fans couldn't afford to come to the game. And so the Ironton Tanks lost out in the Tri-State League too, and they were history, as we're talking about now. At the Ironton Tank games there, they would take the gate receipts and see if they had enough to pay the Ironton Tank players. And then they started passing the hat through the crowd at the games to get more money to make sure they had enough to pay the players of the Ironton Tanks. I have known that there have been many great players played on that field over there. Of course, Glenn Presnell. I worked with a guy named Meat Boykin. I worked at Dayton Malibu with him. That was hard, dangerous, dirty work, I'm telling you. And we'd go up to take a shower, and one day he was leaning in the shower, just coughing his head off and spitting up blood and mucus, and he said, boy, said, get the hell out of here. Said, you'll die here in this iron foundry. You go back to college. Meat Boykin had graduated in 1948, went to Indiana University as a running back, blew his knee out, but the coach at Indiana University had gotten a job with the Detroit Lions and took him to Detroit where he blew his knee out. Old-timers still say that Meat Boykin might have been the toughest player ever to come out of Lawrence County. He was a heck of a ball player. And then there was, of course, Lefty McAsee, who played for the Bears when they won the NFL championship 70-0. And then there have been two guys that I knew rather well, Danny Pride and Coy Bacon. I went to grade school here in Ironton. I was skinnier then than I am now. I went to John Campbell Elementary School here in Little Ironton, and we would play sports there on the playground. But the playground was pea gravel, and there were slicky slides and merry-go-rounds and teeter-totters and things in the way. They wouldn't let us play football. So we would go there, and we devised a game called run-through. we would make a boundary there on the 7th Street side and one on the 6th Street side, and we would choose somebody who wasn't really swift or courageous and put them out there and say, "You're it." And then we would all get down on the boundary of one side, and we would run to the other boundary. If the guy touched you with 2 hands, you were caught, and you were out there helping catch other guys. Well, I joined in on that, and very soon it went from 2-hand touch to accidental tackling. That's what they called it, accidental tackling. And I know my mother had just put on some patches on my clothes, just ironed on some patches on my knees. And we were playing there at noon recess. And they tackled me, and they tore my pants about half off of me, and I was ashamed. I was so skinny anyway. And I was bleeding, and I had pieces of gravel in my leg and things. I tried to sneak in the classroom without getting caught by my teacher because we weren't allowed to play tackle sports. And she caught me, and she said, "Now you go home and you change clothes and you clean up." Well, I just lived 5 blocks away, so I walked home. And I fixed me a bologna sandwich. It's been a long time ago. And drank an RC. RC was big then. And it's about 12 o'clock, so I knew the Lone Ranger was going to be on radio. So I sat down and turned that on, and this man in the studio had 2 hollow coconut shells, and he would alternately pound them on the wooden desk as if they were the hoofbeats of Silver, the Lone Ranger's horse. And Clayton Moore would yell out, "Hi-oh, Silver, away, big fella." And I thought, big fella, you better get back to school here. This is taking too long. But my point is, when I played run-through with those guys there at Camel School as a 6th grader, there were 2 of them who were going to play NFL that were tackling me and piling on me. One was Danny Pride, who played for the Chicago Bears, and the other was Coy Bacon. I worked with Coy Bacon to Dayton Mountain at an iron foundry, and he was working a grinder there, and I was supposed to turn the castings. Those castings, they weighed 90 pounds each, and I just wasn't very strong. I lasted 17 minutes with him. He was on piece work, and I was on no work. And that man's arms were bigger than my lower legs. And I got to know Coy and Danny, went to grade school together, and then we played against each other in high school. Lastly, I want to tell you about the greatest athlete ever to walk on that field over there. And if you're young, you probably do not know much about him. His name was James Francis Thorpe. He came from Prague, Oklahoma. He was a Sauk and Fox Indian. His great-grandfather was Black Hawk, against whom the United States and Abraham Lincoln fought a war in 1832. Jim was born in 1888, and he died in 1953. I want you to listen to this. Jim Thorpe won the pentathlon and decathlon, 15 events at the 1912 Olympics. And the King of Sweden declared him the greatest athlete of the first half of the 1900s. He played Major League Baseball for 6 years. He didn't start playing pro football in 1915 and played for 15 years. But he was on the downhill side later on. He played for 7 teams in 15 years, one of them Portsmouth Spartans, Canton Bulldogs. Well, Jim Thorpe, it was found out that the investigation had taken some money for playing semi-pro baseball. So they stripped him of his gold medals. They gave him back to his daughter in 1982. He had been dead almost 30 years. But Jim Thorpe was over here at Ironton. And the reason I know this so well is that I went to Rio Grande College, Bevo Land. And they had a president up there just before Bevo made a splash named Charlie Davis. He played semi-pro football on the weekends for extra money before he had become a college administrator. He would tell the story over and over of how he tackled Jim Thorpe head on. That was hard to do. Jim Thorpe was a place kicker, defensive back, and a heck of a running back. When he tackled Jim Thorpe, Charlie Davis was knocked unconscious. Now what they usually did, they brought out a bucket of water and threw it in your face, slapped you and told you to get up. You were in the way. Charlie Davis didn't get up. So they decided a way to revive him, get him off the field and continue the game was to take a lit cigarette and burn him on the top of the hand. And they did, and they seared his skin. He came to, they got him off the field, the game went on. Times changed, don't they? It's a lot different now. But I want to tell you, I know about that field over there. I never played on it, but when I worked there in the summertime to put my son through college at very expensive Yale, I had to be there at 6 o'clock to rake the field where they cut the field on a certain day, the grass, on a certain day, make it look right. Well, I'd get up and I'd report there at 6 o'clock, and they'd give me this huge aluminum tooth rake. And I had to rake the width of that field from the grandstand over the bleacher side over there, rake the dead grass off so it would look right for the Ironton football game that night. If you don't believe it, ask Mark Lutz, coach at Rock Hill, because he and the kids were out there putting down the white lines on the gridiron so that they could play on that beautiful field. So good luck to all the teams here that are represented. I hope that you have good luck in your season. I hope that you all stay safe. And I hope that you remember, it's a privilege to play on a football team. And bonds are formed which last a lifetime because you got to work together or you won't be successful. Thank you very much.
Sitting there listening to Bob round off some names, Meat Boykin, Glenn Presnell, Coy Bacon, Danny Pride, and McAfee is in the Ironton High School Hall of Fame. Going in this year is another tank. Shorty Davis is going in this year. He'll be inducted November 2nd. So the tanks are well represented in the Ironton High School Hall of Fame. I tell you what, listen to Bob and getting ready to listen to William, Dr. Dingus wanted one thing. Are you ready for some football? A little Friday night football. We invite you to the greatest show on turf tonight. Ironton and Fairland's playing. Come over there tonight and watch the game. William will be there talking. William, he was an academic All Big Ten in 1986 and 87. In 1987, he was selected as a Cotton Bowl Scholar Athlete. William graduated from the Ohio State University. In 1988, William was drafted by the Detroit Lions. He played 6 seasons with Detroit, 3 seasons with the Kansas City Chiefs, 2 seasons with the Atlanta Falcons, in which he started strong safety for the Falcons in the 1999 Super Bowl. How about a big round of applause for Mr. William White?
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here today. Let's give Bob another round of applause because that was some great history you gave me. And actually, after listening to you, I'm going to wing some other things because I think what you said is very meaningful because that's why we're in the position that we're in right now. I mean, to go back and talk about what they did in the 1904s, the 1919s, and 1930s before any of us was even thought about being born. It's really a privilege to understand how you get from there to now the positions and opportunities we have for the sacrifices those guys made. Now, I'm not going to be as long as Bob because I'm going to start back in 1988. So I'm not going to take up that much time. It is great to know that the Lions started down here in Ohio, the great state of Ohio. Then they end up going up there to Detroit. But if you really look at their history since they've been up there, they was really only good from 90s to 94 when they had 4 OSU players. So I'm just saying, myself, Chris Spillman was on the team. Keith Wendell, he was a defensive end. And we kind of embraced this other guy. He went to OSU. He helped us out a little bit. His name was Barry Sanders. Y'all might know him. He helped us out just a little bit. Yeah, he was all right. He's all right. He ran a couple touchdowns, but But no, just to look at that history, that's really impressive because now look at the opportunities we have. I mean, when I was in the 8th grade, I had all D's and an F. I met this guy that was an engineer. Thought what he was doing was pretty cool, and more importantly, he was making like $40,000, which I thought was a ton of money. But then, because of football, he told me, hey, just like you practice every day, you got to practice math, science, English, social studies. He said, your brain is a muscle. So just like y'all practice every day to get better, you practice on Monday through Thursday to be good on Friday, right? And you go out there Friday, the last thing you worried about when you playing hard and you win a game, the last thing on your mind is all the hard work you did when you was practicing. And that's one of the things that I was able to embrace. Again, I had all D's and an F, and then all of a sudden I got a scholarship at The Ohio State University to go there and play football. And again, one of the things, again, we embrace, look at what they were doing back there in the 1919s. The thing that they did, now we're able to have scholarships to go play football. If I'd have never had a scholarship to play football, I'd have never went to college. I was from the hood in Lima. I'd have never been an engineer. So you got to embrace the thing. It's not always just getting to the NFL. It's a lot of things you learn in football. Football is a team sport. And as Earl Bruce used to always tell us, team means together, everyone achieves more. That's what you learn in football. You got to come together as a team. You can have the best people in the world, but if everybody's selfish, you're not going to win a lot of games. You're not. Matter of fact, when I was with the Atlanta Falcons, my first year there in '97, we had 4 people went to the Pro Bowl. We were 9-7, but 4 people went to the Pro Bowl. The following year, the 3 captains, we came together and we said, man, we can be really good if we just come together. We had 2 additional starters. So it was 19 of the 21 people the following year was the same starters. I promise you I didn't get any better, neither did anyone else. But we came together, and our theme for that whole year was, whatever the coach say, that's what we gonna do. And we end up going 13-3. Same talent, same guys, but we came together as a team. And when you come together as a team, you realize your ability. You embrace what you can do, and that helps you in life. That helps you in life. Who won the Super Bowl last year? Nobody know who won the Super Bowl? You sitting there with your hands all crossed. You didn't watch the Super Bowl last year? Who won the Super Bowl? Say New England. There. Now, Brady, everybody talk about Tom Brady all the time. Now, just imagine if the whole team was full of Tom Bradys. Would they be any good? But because Tom Brady got other people with skill sets, it makes him look good, but as a team, they're good. Football teaches you a whole bunch of stuff about life. When you get outside of football, when you start working, you start getting your family, it's about what skills do you have to make other people better. And that's the thing that I love about it, as Bob was saying again, you look at the sacrifices those guys made for us to be able to be in a position that we're in right now, to do the things we want to do, to embrace it all because of football. As I was telling them, is she here? This news lady left. She was such a football fan. She don't know anything about football. Football, it's life-changing. For me, it's life-changing. Because, again, I wouldn't be sitting in front of you guys right now. And, again, when I went to Ohio State, the last thing on my mind was playing in the NFL. I went there to be an engineer. But because Earl Bruce always taught us about working hard and being the best you can be, I was able to start. But, again, that's learning from the sport of football. You always got to go out. You always got to give your all. It doesn't matter if you're down or up. Again, I remember we were in '98 when we was playing the Minnesota Vikings. They were 15-1 or something like that, in a NFC championship game. We were down the entire game. I think it was maybe 50 seconds left in the game, we tied it up. Went into double overtime, we end up winning it with a field goal. Now, the last thing on anybody's mind was what? Being down 4 quarters. Who cares? That's about life. Football teach you about, it's not the hard stuff. It's not the failure. You learn. Right, Coach? Where are the coaches? All the coaches raise their hand. Where the coaches at? There we go. That's why you practice them. That's why they yell at you. And when they yell at you, you know what that is? Love. They're trying to get you to become better. They want you to be the best you can be. And they're not telling you you fail, because failure is not failure until you quit. That's when you fail. When you look at anything that was ever created, I promise you they didn't make it the very first time they tried it. You learn from it. That's what the coaches are telling you every day on the practice field. You make a mistake, practice to get better. You get in a C or a B, you keep practicing. You keep going over that social studies, that math. I'm going to stick on math and science because I got 2 guys over here doing engineering. How many Fairland people going to do engineering? You going to do engineering? You got to do 20 push-ups right now. I mean, come on. You're not going to do engineering? Okay, I'll talk to you later. How about a peek? Any engineers back there? Nobody want to be an engineer? There we go. I got y'all. Thank you very much. But no, seriously, football is a great sport because of all the things it teach you, and we should really appreciate how they started that back here when there was like nothing. Think about it, 1919. Ain't like they was driving up in a parking lot, right? To come to the game, tailgating, having a good time like we were doing. All of that to now to where we are today, to be able to celebrate it, to go out there and look at our kids, to see the ability that they have, the fun that we have, the coming together. I mean, you go to a Ohio State game, 50% of the people that's tailgating, they don't even go to the game. But it's all because of the game. So the game of football has really, to me, kind of changed the way the world is and bringing people together. And I'm so appreciative of, the NFL starting here and it's really starting here. Why did they pick Ironton? You know that, Bob? Why did they pick this area?
What's interesting here is that when Ironton folded financially, they asked for a franchise for the NFL, but you have to be so many miles apart from other teams in the NFL, so they refused Ironton because Portsmouth was there. And these river rats are tough people now.
See, that's what I want you to get on. I want you to get on that toughness. See, Ironton folk, there we go. Y'all, in your genes is that toughness. You know what I'm saying? That ability not to quit is in you. That's where the skill sets come from. So, they didn't want to go to some place that's soft. I mean, they didn't want to go to Detroit or somewhere up north and start a football team. They had to steal from us, right? They had to steal from us to bring him up there to say, okay, now we'll start doing this. But no, you guys embrace your history. Make and continue it on. Because, having it start here to grow, and you guys are still doing a great job. Y'all going to the state finals this year? Yes, sir. Ooh. You just going to be quiet? You're not going to say anything? Okay, got you. But that's what it's about. It's about coming together, having that confidence in yourself, and not just in football, but in everything you do in life. Be the best that you can be. Regardless of what it was in the past, again, as your coach, who cares what you was doing last week? What are you doing now? Nobody cares about last year, what your record was last year. What are you doing now? How are you practicing now to get ready for the next game? That's what it's about. So embrace that. Well, I appreciate you guys for having me, and go Tanks, and we'll be at the game tonight. Fairland's playing. What's that other team? Who y'all playing? That team on there? That team over there? You gonna be talking some smack? No? I'm gonna talk with you. I'm gonna teach you how to talk some smack, okay? There we go. All right, thank you guys for having me. Have a great day.
Hello, I'd like to thank William again. At this time, I'd like to bring up Mayor of Ironton, Katrina Keith, for a presentation.
I normally do not need a microphone, first of all. Thank you so much, Marty. Marty did an excellent job, so please, everybody, a round of applause for his guidance on this and his leadership in taking this to be able to celebrate 100 years of the Tanks and then the Fighting Tigers to be able to be on that field, that is tradition for us. So to be a part of Lawrence County, he said it right. Be proud of where you're from. I'm proud to be a Lawrence Countian. I am proud to be an Irontonian. We have a skill set here that other communities don't have. And we do come together, and we are a community that rallies when we need to rally. So congratulations to everybody here. Good luck on your season. But in my official state, as the mayor of the city of Ironton, we wanted to go ahead and proclaim today as Ironton Tanks Day in the city of Ironton. We have a proclamation here. We'll present it tonight at the halftime show. And then, Marty, where do we want to place this? That's a good question. So we'll decide where this is going to be hung, maybe in the school. But thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. I hope you've had a wonderful afternoon. And guys, go Tigers.
Thank you, Mayor Keith. Again, I want to thank everyone for coming out. Creating an event such as this, I mean, being that it was 100 years, my goal with this was to just have people talking about it. You know, we could have done several different events, parades. You know, we even talked about this thing when we tried to start something back in February. What can we do? With 100 years of history. So having the opportunity to have Mr. White be here to represent Detroit, I thank you again for being here with us. There are a few people that I would like to take the time to thank and reach out to with this. First, Mr. Bob Leith, thank you for being here. Obviously, Mr. White, Mr. McKnight, thank you for emceeing this. The Armory Smokehouse, everybody okay with the Armory Smokehouse? Good stuff, huh? Yeah. Thank you all for that. I would like to thank my team, as we were talking about in team, my coworkers and those from the Chamber of Commerce. Thank you all for your help for setting this up, decorations. I think they did a fantastic job. The Ironton Tribune, thank you very much. If you notice, most of your seats today, there was a bag. They have ran an 8-page piece on the Ironton Tanks history, which has got a lot of pictures and a lot of information. So thank you again, Sarah and Jim Walker, for doing that. And I want to thank those schools that are here. Thank you for taking the time to be here. I was telling Dr. Dingus this morning as we were talking, and I was looking through some of this stuff. There are teachable times. I think this is one of those teachable times for you guys to understand the history that surrounds you, that's here. So maybe tonight when you go home and you may pick up a name that someone talked about and think about that name, research it. I've researched this for a long time, but pretty heavily over the last 6-7 months. There is so much history there. So take a look when you get a chance to look through that. So I've got one more thing, and we're going to conclude this. I have a gift here for Mr. White. Just want to present that with you.
Thank you.
This is a book called Home and Away that was written here. When I started this project, I'd reached out to some people in the community. Mr. Joe Unger, who gave the invocation, had turned me to this book. He said, "You have got to read this book. It is phenomenal, talking about the history of this area." So I purchased the book and I was hooked. So it's a good piece, Home and Away. So that's what we presented you with. So you could take a little bit of Lawrence County back, represent to the Detroit Lions. So
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you very much.
All right. This will conclude our event. Thank you for attending.
No, we want. There's an OU, Dean, she wants me to cut her off. I just wanted you to come up here so they can all take a picture of us. Yes. And as she's walking up, yes, she went to OU, but if you would notice the color she's wearing, she's representing, I'm just saying.
We would like to thank also Dean Nicole Pennington for letting us use the facility here at Ohio University Southern.
See, right here, he's taking a picture, right there. There we go. Buckeyes together, there we go.